Now this technique of looking at the objectives first, looking at your decision criteria first, and then brainstorming a bunch of alternatives and measuring those back against the objectives is an excellent technique for you to use even by yourself in your office. You can sit down and go through that 3-step process. It's also an excellent technique to use in a group. And like you saw the first time around, the first time we did this exercise, people are really quick to just go to alternatives. And so if you're doing this with a group, I highly recommend you actually use 2 pieces of paper or maybe 2 flip charts, or draw a line down the middle of a whiteboard and put objectives on one side, alternatives on the other. And then as you're talking, if anyone throws an alternative out there, sure, write it down, but then bring them back to the first page, the first side of the board, and say, let's get to the decision criteria. Let's agree on this first. And that actually, defining your decision criteria is a step that most people just plain skip. And then they wonder why they have trouble making decisions and why it gets so stressful. Now, there's actually a 3rd step to decision making, but I don't have time to talk about it today. So you can go to my website, uncommonclarity.com, and there's a lot of good articles there about decision making. But with that, I want to move on from that general technique for making decisions, and I want to give you a couple of specific situations where you can apply this technique to reduce stress. And one of these situations is a personal situation from your home life, perhaps, and the other is a business example. So we'll start with the personal one. Raising children, especially teenagers. Does that create any stress? I think so. Okay, true or false? Responsible parents need to set boundaries for their kids. True or false? False. Responsible parents need to teach their children to make smart decisions. If you tell your kids, be home at 10 o'clock, that's an alternative. If you tell your kids to pick up the room, that's an alternative. If you tell your kids no we, is that right? We, is it a verb or a noun? If you tell your kids no we until the homework is complete, that's an alternative. Where are the objectives? Who cares if they pick up their room? What difference does it make? Is having a messy room a health hazard?
In some cases, yes.
It could be. It could be, couldn't it? There might be dirty dishes underneath those dirty clothes, right? But that would be an objective. And furthermore, if there are dirty dishes under the dirty clothes, your cupboards might be running out of dishes. So the objective might be to get the dishes back in the cupboard so you can use them. Is it a fire hazard? Well, it could be. So those could be legitimate reasons, good reasons why someone should pick up their room. If, however, the only objectives you can come up with are, I want it to look nice because that's the way I like it. When people come over, I want them to be impressed with the gorgeous redecorating I did in your room. I mean, if those are the objectives you come up with, don't expect your kids to be all that excited about it. But if you sit down with your children and talk to them about objectives, and then help them come up with alternatives, they can learn to make smart choices. But if you just lay down the rule, setting the boundary, and you say, you have to pick up your room, you're going to just get a fight. That's all you're going to get. If you think about a messy room, there are a lot of alternatives. And of course, one is just to close the door. When I was a kid, we were lucky to have someone named Louise who showed up once in a while to clean the house. And Louise's objective was to have clear surfaces so she could dust and vacuum. That means that if we didn't pick up stuff, she would pick stuff up for us. And when Louise picked stuff up, we never saw it again. She really put things away. So our objective was simply to be able to find our things, to know where the things were. So we would put them away before she showed up. So my parents never said, you have to pick up your room. They just said, Louise is coming. That was good enough. Now let's take the more serious issue, for instance, telling your kid that they should be home at 10 o'clock. Probably everyone thinks you got to lay down that rule, right? When we had, I've got 2 daughters, and when we were raising our daughters, we really never made any rules. And we always talked to them about objectives. So I would say, okay, 1, I want you safe. 2, a part related to that, I don't want you riding with anyone who's been drinking. 3, I want to know when I'm supposed to be worried. Is it at 10 o'clock I should call the police? Should I call the police at 12 if you're not here? Should I wait till, should I just go to bed and when I get up in the morning, if you're not here, should I call the police? I want to know when to worry. When should I go look for you? And the third, or was that fourth? The fourth is I need to be able to get some sleep. Maybe it's summer and you can sleep in, but I have to get to work. So in telling them that, we want you safe, we need to know when to be alarmed, and we need to be able to get some sleep. What do you recommend? What alternatives would you come up with? And they were amazingly good at this. They'd say, well, we're going to Jenna's house first. So you know where we are, that's safe, right? And we're going to drive. We're going to take one of the cars. So therefore, we won't be riding with anyone who's drinking. And then if we decide to go somewhere else, we'll call you. So you'll know where we are. And regardless, we'll call you at 10 o'clock and tell you what the next plans are. So that solution met every one of our objectives. Then at 9:30, they might call and say, we're going to Paul's house. Okay, great. What are you going to do there? How long are you going to be? I don't know. Why don't we call you when we get there? 15 minutes later, they call and say, well, there aren't very many people here, so we're coming home. No, that didn't happen. But then they would say, we would have the same conversation with them again. Okay, so how do we know when to worry? What's the next step? How will we know when you're safe? And so then they would say, we're going to call you at 11. Okay, fine. So at some point there, I say, okay, now we need to go to sleep. So I think you have to come home. And then they would agree. And this always worked. We didn't have to fight. But if you tell them to be home at 10, that's not even, not only is that an alternative, it's an incredibly arbitrary one. Why not 10:15 or 9:45? Where are you picking this number out of the hat? So work with your kids to agree on the objectives, to establish good objectives that make sense, and then let them come up with alternatives, and they'll be much more committed to what they're trying to do.